Hawa.
I want to show you some things that I don't think you even knew existed. It goes against everything Manifest Destiny teaches about Native Americans. And I want you to know this part of our history because people erased it. And we'll get to that later on in the program. Erased it intentionally. Erased it intentionally. That's an important part of it. America's history didn't begin with Christopher Columbus came over. There were ancient cities with advanced architectures all across North America. Did you know that? Hundreds of years before Columbus came. You always think, oh, the Indians, they didn't scour the land. No, not true. These were cities as large as any in the world at the time. London or Rome, they were metropolises. Archaeologists say they have found evidence of 200,000 actual cities of mound-like structures all across North America that were here long before Columbus. But we don't know anything about them. Why? Why?
Shalom, Shabbatah, Ampetu, Washte, beautiful people. Thanks for being here again. This is part 2, Untold Truth of Ancient America. So we got part 1 down already, which is the true old world, the oldest land out of the water. We got Agassiz to let us know it's America. So with that, I just want to show in this video what else came with America. So we have the oldest land, right? Logically, we would have, you know, the first civilizations, the first man as well, right? So regarding civilizations and all that, we know it starts out with agriculture. So I just wanted to show something in this video so you can correlate, so you can relate, so you can have a foundational truth, so you can picture things a lot better as we go with this series. All right, so we're going to talk about how fertile it was over here, the agriculture, how important it was to the American Indians, the Aborigines, and how important it is today still to the rest of the world. All right, our agriculture. All right, so I hope you don't get too bored. We're going to read a lot. You know, it's going to be one of those long videos, but I hope it's interesting to you, and I hope you learn a lot from it. All right, so let's start. Hey, 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 hey. Hawa. In the book A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving, and it's describing here the arrival of Columbus and his ship to the island of Haiti, in Hispaniola. It says, in the transparent atmosphere of the tropics, objects are described at a great distance, and the purity of the air and serenity of the deep blue sky gave a magical effect to the scenery. Under these advantages, the beautiful island of Haiti revealed itself to the eye as they approached. Its mountains were higher and more rocky than those of the other islands, but the rocks reared themselves from among rich forests. The mountains swept down into luxuriant plains and green savannas, while the appearance of cultivated fields with the numerous fires at night and the columns of smoke which rose in various parts by day all showed it to be populous. It rose before them in all the splendor of tropical vegetation, one of the most beautiful islands in the world, and doomed to be one of the most unfortunate, again, one of the most beautiful islands in the world, and doomed to be one of the most unfortunate. In the evening of the 6th of December, Columbus entered a harbor at the western end of the island, to which he gave the name of St. Nicholas, by which it is called at the present day. The harbor was spacious and deep, surrounded with large trees, many of them loaded with fruit, while a beautiful plain extended in front of the port, traversed by a fine stream of water. From the number of canoes seen in various parts, there were evidently large villages in that neighborhood, but the natives had fled with terror at sight of the ships. Leaving the harbor of St. Nicholas on the 7th, they coasted along the northern side of the island. It was lofty and mountainous, but with green savannas and long sweeping plains. At one place they caught a view of a rich and smiling valley that ran far into the interior between two mountains and appeared to be in a high state of cultivation. For several days they were detained in a harbor which they called Port Concepcion. A small river emptied into it. After winding through a delightful country, The coast abounded with fish, some of which even leaped into their boats. They didn't even have to fish. The abundance. That sounds biblical to me, scriptural. Fish multiplying, right? Just jumping into your boat. All right, the land of plenty. They cast their nets, therefore, and caught great quantities, and among them several kinds similar of those of Spain. The first fish they had met with resembling those of their own country. They heard also the notes of the birds which they mistook for their nightingale, and of several others to which they were accustomed. These, by the simple associations of idea which speak to the heart, reminded them strongly of the groves of their distant Andalusia. They fancied the features of the surrounding country resembled those of the more beautiful provinces of Spain, and in consequence of this idea, the admiral named the island Hispaniola, Dodge the hijack. The Hesperides, the Greeks, Hispaniola, Hesperid, it was already, this word is in here somewhere already. Continuing with the earthly paradise, in the most famous Atlantis book written called The Antediluvian World, Atlantis, The Antediluvian World by Ignatius Donnelly, he points out certain things that he wants to address or talk about. So in the bottom here, he's going to mention something we just talked about, the Hesperides, right? You can see down point number 5. So, we've already read from this book in part 4 of the all the series we got, and we're going to continue to read from this book. It has a lot of information to correlate with what we've been learning and researching. So point number 5, that it was the true antediluvian world. All right, so America / Atlantis, right, was the true antediluvian world. The Garden of Eden, there we go again, the Garden of Eden was in America. The Garden of the Hesperides, there you go, Hesperides. In the book Prehistoric Structures of Central America, Who Erected Them? A lecture by Martin Ingham Townsend of Troy, New York. The ancient Greek and Roman scholars knew of the existence of the Western continent. It says here, that ancient book entitled The Book of Wonders, ascribed to Aristotle, contained the following. When the Carthaginians, who were masters of the Western Ocean, observed that many traders and other men, attracted by the fertility of the soil and the pleasant climate, had fixed their homes, they feared that the knowledge of this land should reach other nations. A great concourse to it of men from the various lands of the earth would follow. That the conditions of life then so happy on that island would not only be unfavorably affected, but the Carthaginian empire itself suffer injury, and the dominion of the sea be wrested from their hands. And so they issued a decree that no one, under penalty of death, should thereafter sail thither. And they're talking about America. This passage is quoted not merely with a claim that it refers to the continent of America, but for the purpose of showing how carefully the Phoenician people, whether Asiatic, Carthaginian, or Spanish, guarded from the great world the foreign discoveries which they had made, and where their kindred were enjoying prosperity, and to enable us to see how little likely their discoveries would be to come to the knowledge of the great mass of mankind. Let us look for a moment at some of the things which ancient Greeks and Latin authors have said indicating their knowledge of the existence of a Western continent. Crates, a commentator on Homer, is quoted by authority of Strabo, a very learned author of the century before Christ, as saying that Homer means in his account of the Western Ethiopians. Western Ethiopians. Alright, so what do they mean by Western Ethiopians? So who's the Eastern Ethiopians? Also, there's two. Alright, so I know we've mentioned this before. If you've watched Con Drop and followed Drop Nation, you know about the three Ethiopias, or the farthest Ethiopia, which is America. Ethiopia, right? Etymology, burnt skin, or people of dark skin in Ethiopian, right? So there was people of dark skin in the Americas as well. So the Western Ethiopians, right? So this author is letting you know that when they're saying Western Ethiopians, they're talking about the Americas. So it says here that as saying that Homer means in his account of the Western Ethiopians, the inhabitants of the Atlantis or the Hesperides. There we go. Again, the Atlantis or the Hesperides, as the unknown world of the West was then previously called. So real quick, I just wanted to show you what I meant about the three Ethiopias and what they were talking about in the Middle Ages and what was known in the Middle Ages and referenced a lot in the Middle Ages. I'm in the book here, Lost Tribes and Promised Lands by Ronald Sanders. All right. So this book correlates a lot of the story or mythology or myths of Prester John, which AKA we see most likely was King David, and his land or the empire of Prester John, emperor of the Ethiopians, was actually in the whole Americas. All right. So it says, where then is the remarkable country? Our magnificent, writes Prester John, dominates the three Indias. Again, if you saw my past video, yes, there was three Indias and three Ethiopias. You see, even India at that time was not named India, it was called Hindustan. So when they're talking about the three Indias, they're talking about the tropical zones in the earth where the people indigo or people of dark skin, the Indians, right, lived. Not just we're talking about like Hindus or like Indians, like what Columbus called the Aborigines. We're just talking about people that lived in tropical zones, and extends to farther India. The farthest India, that's America. Just like the farthest Ethiopia, where the body of St. Thomas the Apostle rests. The legend of St. Thomas, right, supposed to be in India, but we're talking about America. It reaches through the desert towards the place of the rising of the sun and continues through the valley of deserted Babylon, close by the Tower of Babel. Close to the Tower of Babel. All right, I'm going to show you guys historically what resembles the Tower of Babel. What's an exact match of what Herodotus and Diodoro describes as the Tower of Babel, and that is the Pyramid of Cholula in Mexico, which was the real Tower of Belus, the Tower of Babel. So he's saying that Prester John's land, right, was very close by the Tower of Babel, and that's in Mexico. Suddenly, the vague immensity takes on biblical tinge. This is deepened when John informs us that his territories comprise the Pison, which is one of the four rivers that rise up out of the terrestial paradise. All right, we're still talking about the Garden of Eden, a fertile place, right, America, according to the 2nd chapter of Genesis. Furthermore, like the land of Havilah, and there's another land just like Hesperides, Eden, or Havilah, we're talking about America, around which the biblical Pison flows. John's country contains gold. All right, we're filled with gold over here, and onyx. It also flows with milk and honey. We already got the honey account, right, in Columbus' book. A hint at that location of this realm is provided by Genesis 2:13, which tells us that another of the four rivers of Eden, the Gihon, compasses the whole land of Ethiopia. The whole land of Ethiopia. John tells us that his palace is in Susa, the ancient capital of Persia, but this also implied proximity to Ethiopia in the vague geographical imagination of medieval Europe. All right, so let's read this footnote right here. It says, this confused geography has ancient and honorable roots. The first verse of the book of Esther describes the realm of the Persian king Ahasuerus, whose palace also was at Susa, as extending from India even unto Ethiopia. In Greek and Roman authors, there is a similar vagueness about a vast region taken in by terms like India and Ethiopia. We just read from the other book, Prehistoric Structures of Central America, right? How they were saying that the Western Ethiopians, that is really Atlanteans or America, right? So again, it's telling us here that these terms of India and Ethiopia have a similar vagueness. It's too vague to tell you exactly where it is. It's all over. The latter, even in its narrowest sense, comprise a much larger area than present-day Ethiopia. It's a much larger area. They're not just talking about present-day Ethiopia, okay? And beginning just south of the first cataract of the Nile, and about its relationship with the better-known Persia. In the apocryphal Acts of St. Thomas, the apostle moves easily between Persia and India, starting roughly with the 5th century apocryphal writer, the Pseudo-Abdias, who describes the exploits of the apostles Thomas, Bartholomew, and Matthew in each of the three Indias. The three Indias. This latter concept became a standard one in the Middle Ages. All right, so this was a standard concept in the Middle Ages. That's what I'm trying to show you, that when we read in these old books and they're just saying, oh, he lived in India, or he lived in the Western Ethiopia, or in Ethiopia, you got to really research what they're talking about, because these places didn't exist back then, right? As a specific country or location like what we think of today. All right, again, one of the three Indias, it says, faced Ethiopia. One of the three Indias faced Ethiopia. According to the Pseudo-Vedas, the second faced Persia, and the third occupied the ends of the world, the ends of the earth, right? Farthest India, America, where they hadn't gone, between the ocean and the realm of darkness, because that's where the sun sets too, right? The West, underworld, a lot of underworld mythology related to America, especially when you read Egyptian hieroglyphs, and basically most of the Mesoamerican culture. They also say, that is the underworld, right? Because the sun sets there. The third became especially fruitful for the geographical imagination. All right, so listen to this. The third India, right, became especially fruitful for the geographical imagination, the region of Untold Highlands, in which the plural term Indias, etymologically one and the same as Indies. Okay, the Indias. When you hear in Indias in any of these old books, they're just talking about the Indies, West Indies. All right, came to rest for one and for all. Continuing with the footnote, there also were less mysterious, more valid definitions of the three Indias. Among medieval geographers, listen to this, among medieval geographers, but for most Europeans, even learned ones, the term covered a vast and distant region of dark-skinned peoples. All right, India wasn't over there what we think of India as a country today. When they were referring to India or Ethiopia, right? It just meant a distant region of dark-skinned peoples. What does Ethiopia mean? Burnt skin or burnt face, right? It doesn't mean a specific country like what we think today. It was a region covered, a vast distant region of dark-skinned peoples, culminating in a countless array of islands in one direction, and Ethiopia, the biblical Kush, in the other. So continuing this book, Lost Tribes and Promised Lands by Ronald Sanders. Just one more thing. It says here an account of somebody who supposedly was from the tribe of Dan. It says here that he said he was a member of the tribe of Dan, which was now living with three of the other lost tribes beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Remember, Ethiopia. Which one are we talking about? Huh? Dan had left the kingdom of Israel long before the conquest by the Assyrians in 722 BC, for he had refused to participate in Jeroboam's revolt against Solomon's son Rehoboam, and had gone into exile instead. The Danites had thought at first going to Egypt, but it was forbidden them to return to the scene of their ancient servitude. Finally, God gave them good courage and advice, namely to go up the river Pison until they reached the land of Ethiopia, which they found fertile with numerous vineyards and gardens. That thus the Danites dwelled here for many years, multiplying and increasing greatly. They were then followed by three other tribes, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Wow. Who crossed the desert and encamped until they came to the land of the Danites. In their wanderings they slew many Ethiopians in a territory extending 4 days' journey in each direction, and they have been fighting with 7 kingdoms up to this day. And these 4 tribes, and those who dwelt in the ancient Havilah, the paradise, praise a garden where there is gold, trusted in the Lord. We already read how there is gold in the rivers in Hispaniola, how Columbus is writing to the king and queen of Spain, telling them that. All right, so we're almost done in this book. Again, Lost Tribes and Promised Lands by Ronald Sanders. Just again, we came over here because I wanted to show you what I meant about Ethiopian. So it says, to the extent that his blackness, right, they're talking about his skin color, and they're talking about Prester John or King David, was that of an Ethiopian. All right. The extent of his blackness was that of an Ethiopian. John's emerging coloration had a long and not always unfavorable history in European eyes. It should be pointed out that, like the geographical term Ethiopia, the anthropological ones Ethiop Ethiop and Ethiopian were in ancient and medieval times thoroughly ambiguous. All right, these terms were thoroughly ambiguous. So when we're reading Greeks mention Ethiopians, we have to be very careful of what we're reading. We have to really research, trace the word etymologically, and see what they're trying to say to us. All right. So again, the anthropological ones, Ethiopia and Ethiopia, were in ancient and medieval times thoroughly ambiguous. When they referred to someone from a specific region, they were close to our modern usage, even though that region, which began at the Upper Nile and had its capital at Meroe, sometimes stretched southward and eastward as far as the imagination would allow. But Ethiopian served to designate color. Again, but Ethiopian served to designate color before it came to be applied to a region. Again, what does Ethiopian mean? They just mean you, so-called Negro. They're talking about dark-skinned people, color. They're not talking about that you're from Ethiopia, the country, or that region in Africa. Again, but Ethiopian served to designate color before it came to be applied to a region. The Greek Aethiops, from which it is derived, literally meant burnt face, and referred to any person of black complexion. Any person of black complexion, talking about you, I've been telling you this whole time. Whatever his place of origin. Are you of a so-called black complexion, dark skin, and you're living in America? You're an Ethiopian then. You understand what they're trying to say? Homer said of the Ethiopians, listen to this, came from the Greeks right now. Homer said of the Ethiopians that they live at the ends of the earth. The Ethiopians live at the ends of the earth. They're talking about America because that was so far for them at that time. Some near the sunrise and some near the sunset. There's what is it trying to tell you? That there's Ethiopians or so-called black people with black complexion living all over the world where the sun rises and where it sets. In later antiquity, the word tended to become restricted to black Africans. So this became restricted eventually to black Africans, meaning either any Negro or someone specifically from Ethiopia. All right, with parentheses. The biblical term Cush and Cushi, which may have been specifically geographical designations from the outset, came to be translated Ethiopia and Ethiopian. So eventually they turned Cush to mean the same as Ethiopia, but it was never like that in the beginning, respectively, and the ambiguity was thereby reinforced. All right. So the attitudes toward the Ethiopians or Cushites on the part of both the ancient Greek and the Old Testament literatures are strikingly free of the color prejudices of later times. All right, so when the Greeks or the Old Testament is talking about Ethiopians, it's not the same as later on when they're referencing the same word. All right, that's what he's trying to tell you. All right, true. The implication of the Greek term burnt face and of Jeremiah's rhetorical question, can the Ethiopian change his skin or the lepers his spots, is that the Ethiopian complexion is not desirable, but this disapproval is only skin deep. The Ethiops had unfortunately been burnt black by the sun, but this had not affected his soul. Indeed, for Herodotus, it had not even harmed his appearance, for in one passage in the Persian Wars, we read that the Ethiopians are said to be the tallest and handsomest men in the whole world. All right, you heard that, right? This admiration of their stature and physical impressiveness is an attitude to be found elsewhere in ancient literature. All right, so just wanted to come over to this book so we can clear that whole concept of Western Ethiopians. We just heard the Greeks in the other book mention, talk about the Western Ethiopians. All right, so now you know what they mean, and we're going to go back to that book. All right. Pliny also, 631-36, locates the Western Ethiopians somewhere in the Atlantic. This shows that Crates and Pliny believed that the great poet Homer believed in the existence of a great continent on the western shore of the Atlantic Ocean. Plato says in his Timaeus in chapter 6, and this is a story we all know, the sea, the Atlantic Ocean, was indeed navigable and had an island front in the mouth which you and your tongue called the Pillars of Hercules. So saying, very important, Plato, how he says that in his time, you can't cross the Atlantic. It's not navigable. Because when he's retelling the story of Atlantis, he's saying that it was navigable. So in his time, it's not. All right. And this island, he says, is larger than Libya and Asia put together. And there's a passage hence for travelers of that day to the rest of the islands, as well as from those islands to the whole opposite of the continent that surrounds the real sea. It says here, Humboldt quotes that Anaxagoras, who was born 500 years BC and was at most prominent Greek philosopher, speaks of the grand division of the world beyond the ocean. Alien in his Varia Historia, Book 3, Chapter 18, cites Theopompus, an eminent Greek historian born about 300 years BC, as stating that the Meropians inhabit a large continent beyond the ocean, in comparison with which the known world was but an island. Aristotle says in chapter 84 and 85, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, they say that an inhabited island was discovered by the Carthaginians, which abounded in forests and navigable rivers, and fruits of all kinds. All right, we just read, right? Distant from the continent, many days sail. And while the Carthaginians were engaged in making voyages to this land, and some had even settled there on account of the fertility of the soil, the Senate decreed that no one thereafter, under penalty of death, should voyage thither. Aristotle was born 384 years before Christ. So you hear that? They made that a law. You couldn't go to the Americas. They made it a law. You hear that? Go research that. Diodorus of Sicily, who lived in the century of preceding the Christian era, says in his book 519 and 20 that it was the Phoenicians instead of the Carthaginians who were cast upon a most fertile island opposite of Africa, where the climate was that of perpetual spring, and that the land was the proper habitation for gods rather than men. That we're talking about you, right? America, the habitation for gods. You are the gods, right? That they, got the corn from the gods, right? That taught them everything. He speaks of the continent, however, at length and with great detail, enumerating its fertile valleys and navigable rivers, its rich, abundant fruits and supply of game, its valuable forests, and its genial climate. Pliny quotes Statius Sebosus in his volume 2, page 106, Bond, as saying that the two Hesperides and 42 days sail from the coast of Africa. The two Hesperides, again, Hesperides. All right. Continuing in the book, Prehistoric Structures of Central America, Who Erected Them, written in 1895, says here, the soil, climate, and productions of the peninsula of Yucatan and that part of Mexico and Guatemala, where these prehistoric remains are found, are precisely what are described by the European writers who speak of the beauty, the loveliness, and the grandeur of the Hesperides. All right, you heard that, right? The way they described the Hesperides is what you find here in Central America and Mexico. All right, you're listening, right? And the homes founded by the Eastern adventurers beyond the Western Ocean. From the book, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving. And this is volume 1. It says here, page 237, book 4, chapter 1, First Landing of Columbus in the New World. It was on the morning of Friday, 12th of October, 1492, that Columbus first beheld the New World. When the day dawned, he saw before him a level and beautiful island, several leagues in extent, of great freshness and verdure, and covered with trees like a continual orchid. As they approached the shores, they were refreshed by the sight of the ample forest, which in those climates have extraordinary beauty of vegetation. Vegetation, you hear that? They beheld fruits of tempting hue, but unknown kind, growing among the trees which overhung the shores. You see all the fruits that just grow naturally and wild. So they were encountering this paradise, right? Columbus was like, I made it. So like, this is the Eden. You're gonna see what he's gonna describe, but imagine what they were seeing in those times when they got there.
and I believe this was in the Bahamas, Guanahani, I believe he used to call it, you can see that. And this is just one island, so let's keep reading. It says, they beheld fruits again of tempting hue, but unknown kind, growing among the trees, which overhung the shores. The purity and suavity of the atmosphere, the crystal transparency of the seas which bathe these islands, give them a wonderful beauty and must have had their effect upon the unsusceptible feelings of Columbus. Chapter 2. Cruise among the Bahama Islands. On leaving San Salvador, Columbus was at loss which way to direct his course. He beheld a great number of beautiful islands, green and level and fertile. Again, a lot of beautiful islands, green and level and fertile, inviting him in different directions. So on the next island that Columbus went to, he called it Fernandina, and still in the Bahama Islands. Right, he says here, while the men had landed with the cask in search of water, says Columbus, he refreshed himself under the shade of the groves, which he says were more beautiful than any he had ever beheld. The country was as fresh and green as in the month of May in Andalusia, talking about Spain. The trees, the fruits, the herbs, the flowers, the very stones for the most part, as different from those of Spain as night from day, the fruits of their fields and groves, the cotton which was their article of greatest value, and their domesticated parrots. When the Spaniards landed in search of water, they took them to the coolest springs, the sweetest and freshest runs, filling their casks, rolling them up to the boats, and seeking in every way to gratify their celestial visit. So continuing the book, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving. Now Columbus, again, he's still in the Bahama Islands. He's cruising all these little islands there, and he lands on another one, and he names it Isabella. Right? So it says here, delightful as were the others he had visited, he declares that this surpasses them all. Like those, it was covered with trees and shrubs and herbs of unknown kind, and of rich tropical vegetation. The climate had the same soft temperature. The air was delicate and balmy. The land was higher, with a fine bird and hill, the coast of fine sand gently laved by transparent billows. Columbus was enchanted by the lovely scenery of this island. I know not, says he, where first to go, nor are my eyes ever weary of gazing on the beautiful verdure. At the southwest end of the island, he found fine lakes of fresh water, overhung with groves and surrounded by banks covered with herbage. Here he ordered all the casks of the ships to be filled. Here are large lakes, says he in his journal, and the groves about them are marvelous. You hear that? Groves about them are marvelous. And here in all the island, everything is green, and the herbage as in April in Andalusia. The singing of the birds is such that it seems as if one would never desire to depart hence. You hear what he's saying? But where you, your place, your home, there are flocks of parrots which obscure the sun, and other birds, large and small, of so many kinds and so different from ours, that it is wonderful. And beside, there are trees of 1,000 species, each having its particular fruit. Again, you know, you're just walking in the island everywhere, and there are trees of 1,000 species, each having its particular fruit and all of marvelous flavor, so that I am in the greatest trouble in the world not to know them, for I am very certain that they are each of great value. So what he's talking about is that Columbus was definitely known as, you know, he wasn't a good botanist. He, you know, and everybody knew that, and he himself is declaring it right now. He wishes he knew all these species so he can write about, because he knew they were important. But he's telling you, you know, thousands of species of trees, and each having its particular fruit and of all marvelous flavor. All right. I shall bring home some of them as specimens, and also some of the herbs. Columbus was intent on discovering the drugs and spices of the East, and on approaching this island had fancied and perceived in the air which came from it the spicy odors said to be wasted from the island of the Indian seas. As I arrived at this cape, says he, there came thence a fragrance so good and soft of the flowers or trees of the land, that it was the sweetest thing in the world. I believe there are here many herbs and trees which would be of great price in Spain for tinctures, medicines, and spices, but I know nothing of them, which gives me great vexation. The fish which abounded in these seas partook of the novelty which characterized most of the objects in this new world. So continuing in the book A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving. Now Columbus again, he's leaving the Bahamas and he's actually approaching Cuba now. So let's hear what he has to say about Cuba. It says here, as he approached this noble island, he was struck with its magnitude and the grandeur of its features, its high and airy mountains, which reminded him of those of Sicily, its fertile valleys, again it's fertile valleys, and long sweeping plains watered by noble rivers, its stately forests, its bold promontories, and stretching headlands which melted away into the remotest distance. He anchored in a beautiful river free from rocks or shoals or transparent water, its banks overhung with trees. Here, landing and taking possession of the island, he gave it the name of Juana, in honor of Prince Juan, and to the river the name of San Salvatore. He proceeded for some distance up the river, more and more enchanted with the beauty of the country. The forests which covered each bank were of high and wide spreading trees, some bearing fruits, others flowers, while in some both fruit and flower were mingled, thus speaking a perpetual round of fertility. Again, bespeaking a perpetual round of fertility. Among them were many palms, but different from those of Spain and Africa. Again, there was a lot of palm trees here, but very different from those of Spain and Africa. The continual elegies made by Columbus on the beauty of the scenery were warranted by the kind of scenery he was beholding. There is a wonderful splendor, variety, and luxuriance in the vegetation of those quick and ardent climates. The verdure of the groves and the colors of the flowers and blossoms derive a vividness to the eye from the transparent purity of the air and the deep serenity of the azure heavens. The forests, too, are full of life, swarming with birds of brilliant plumage. Painted varieties of parrots and woodpeckers create a glitter amidst the verdure of the grove, and the hummingbirds rove from flower to flower, resembling, as has well been said, animated particles of a rainbow. The scarlet flamingos, too, seen sometimes through an opening of a forest in a distant savanna, have the appearance of soldiers drawn up in battalion, with an advanced scout on the alert to give notice of approaching danger. Nor is the least beautiful part of the animated nature the various tribes of insects that people every plant, displaying brilliant coat of mail which sparkle to the eye like precious gems. Such is the splendor of animal and vegetable creation in these tropical climates, where an ardent sun imparts, in a manner, his own luster to every object and quickens nature into exuberant fecundity. Continuing about Cuba, Columbus says, when speaking of some lovely scene among the groves or along the flowery shore of this favored island, he says one could live there forever. Cuba broke out upon him like an Elysium. It is the most beautiful island, he says, that eyes ever beheld, full of excellent ports and profound rivers. The climate was more temperate here than in other islands, the nights being neither hot nor cold, while the birds and grasshoppers sang all night long. Indeed, there is a beauty in a tropical night in the depth of a dark blue sky, the lambent purity of the stars and the resplendent clearness of the moon that spreads over the rich landscape and the balmy groves, a charm more touching than the splendor of the day. In the sweet smell of the woods and the odor of the flowers which loaded every breeze, Columbus fancied he perceived the fragrance of oriental spices, and along the shores he found shells of the kind of oyster which produces pearls. From the grass growing to the very edge of the water he inferred the peacefulness of the ocean which bathes these islands, never lashing the shore with angry surges. Ever since his arrival among these Antilles, he had experienced nothing but soft and gentle weather, and he concluded that a perpetual serenity reigned over these happy seas.
Continuing with the book, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving, and we're in Cuba, talking about when he was there. And it says here, on their way back, at the time of the Spaniards, right? They, for the first time, witnessed the use of a weed. A weed, now listen to this, which the indigenous caprice of man has since converted into an universal luxury. In the defiance of the opposition of the senses, they beheld several of the native going about with firebrands in their hands and certain dried herbs. Dried herbs, so we're talking about a weed. Now we're talking about dried herbs, which they rolled up. They rolled it up in a leaf, right? In a leaf, and lighting one end, put the other in their mouths, and continued exhaling and puffing out the smoke. So they were they were rolling up some herbs, right? Some dried herbs, weed that he just said, and they're explaining how they were puffing it, smoking it up, exhaling, puffing out the smoke. These rolls they called tobacco, so it was rolled in a tobacco leaf, but it was herbs they were rolling. They weren't smoking tobacco; they were just using the tobacco leaf to roll up herbs. Now, whether that's cannabis, marijuana, most likely, but I know that they also smoked other herbs, Native American or American natives, like sage and other herbs also, not just marijuana. All right, but over here we see a clear description of what they were doing, and they're clearly telling you what it is: dried herbs, a name since transferred to the plant which they were made. On their return to the ships, they gave favorable accounts of the beauty and fertility of the country. They had met with many hamlets, 4 or 5 houses well peopled, embowered among trees laden with unknown fruits of tempting hue and delightful flavor. Around them were fields planted with the aji, or sweet pepper, with potatoes, with maize or Indian corn, and with species of lupin or pulse. Now again, I want to remind everyone, if you saw my corn videos, they're referencing maize or Indian corn. That's the way they knew it as, because in Europe, they already had a Turkish corn, Turkish wheat, which was maize, but that had been there from ancient times, that had come in through Asia or through Turkey from Europe, from Asia to go to Europe, right? They had to go through Turkey or the Turkish Empire. All right, so it was called Indian corn, this one, because this is from the Americas, the newer version, a different breed of it, sweet corn, and so that was the difference. Continues, says, there were fields also of a plant, the root whereof they made their cassava bread. Cassava. These with their fruits of their groves formed the principal food of the natives, who were extremely frugal and simple in their diet. There were vast quantities of cotton, some just sown, some in full grown, and some wrought into the yarn or into nets, of which they made their hammocks. So clothing too, right? Clothing, right? Of this there was great store, a lot of cotton, both wrought and unwrought, in their houses. They had seen many birds of rare plumage, but of unknown species, many ducks, several small partridges, and like Columbus, they had heard the song of a bird, which they had mistaken for the nightingale. All that they had seen, however, betokened a primitive and simple state of society, for with all its beauty, the country was in a wild, uncultivated state. According to them, wild, do they mean in a natural state, as it's supposed to be? What is uncultivated to them? In the book A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving, it says here, the Indians having now become more familiar with the Spaniards, and having in some measure recovered, and we're in Haiti here, we're talking about the Indians in Haiti, from their extreme fear, conducted them to their houses, and set before them cassava or yuca, right? Manioc, bread, fish, roots, and fruits of various kinds of fruits. Learning from the interpreter that the Spaniards were fond of parrots, they brought great numbers of them, which they had domesticated, and indeed offered freely whatever they possessed. Okay, so Very important here. I don't know if you caught that. So it says learning from the interpreter. Remember who was the interpreter? Luis de Torres and the others who spoke Hebrew. So because of this Hebrew interpreter that Columbus brought with him, he was able to communicate with the Indians, and the Indians were able to see that the Spaniards enjoyed parrots. It's telling you right here, right? All right, so remember, interpreter, he brought a Hebrew interpreter and Chaldean. So what are they speaking? Either Hebrew or Babylonian. Either way, they're communicating. This interpreter is communicating with these natives from Haiti, all right? Because they also spoke Hebrew, and that's the foundational truth. We're talking about Paleo Hebrew. Arawak, Arawak, Hawa, Awa, Arawakan, Khan, all right? Cacique, 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 Casing, chief, in American Native, in Arawak, and also in Old Hebrew. The great river which flowed through this valley was bordered with noble forests, among which were palms, bananas, and many trees covered with fruits and flowers. Again, we're in the book A History of Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving. We're in Haiti here, and we're talking again that there was this great river which flowed through this valley, was bordered with noble forests, among which were palms, bananas, and many trees covered with fruits and flowers. We're talking about Eden, Hesperides, Hispaniola. The air was mild as in April. The birds sang all day long, and some were even heard in the night. Now don't get confused when I say Eden like the Eden, but I'm talking about the whole terrestrial paradise, America, you know, rich soil. This is, hey, come on, the promised land is big. It's not just one little spot, you know what I mean? So again, they talking about Haiti in this book again says, according to their accounts, the people of Haiti existed in that state of primitive and savage simplicity, which some philosophers have fondly pictured as the most enviable on earth. They envied you. They envied you, surrounded by natural blessings. You were surrounded by natural blessings, you Aboriginal of America, without even a knowledge of artificial wants. You had no idea of illusions or non-existing fake things, artificial stuff. You had all natural blessings surrounded you. The fertile earth produced the chief part of their food, almost without culture. Their rivers and seacoasts abounded with fish, and they caught the utia, the guana, and a variety of birds. This too being of their frugal and temperate habits, was great abundance, and what nature furnished thus spontaneously they willingly shared with all the world. You hear this? What the nature gave to them, the Creator. What nature, Mother Nature, Hawa, furnishes thus spontaneously, they willingly shared with all the world. They were sharing with them. Hospitality, we are told, was with them a law of nature universally observed. There was no need of being known to receive its succors. Every house was as open to the stranger as his own. Columbus, too, in a letter to Luis de San Angel, observed, true it is that after they felt confidence and lost their fear of us, they were so liberal with what they possessed that it would not be believed by those who had not seen it. If anything was asked of them, they never said no, but rather gave it cheerfully, and showed it as much amity as if they gave their very hearts. And whether the thing were of value or of little price, they were content with whatever was given in return. So you hear how humble you were, Aboriginal, lost tribes, so-called lost tribes, so-called Hebrews. You know, you had tribal names. You know, it's deeper than just religion and Bibles. But it's all about you. It's all about you, these stories, these allegories, whatever you want to call them. But we can't forget the laws. Can't forget what the ancestors told us. All right. So now I want to go back to this book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. And this is by Ignatius Donnelly, again. And I want you to pay close attention to what I'm about to read, what he says about the Legends of Atlantis. We just read, right, how Columbus described the people living in Hispaniola, how they were living in this fertile paradise, right? Abundance, and how gentle they were, how peaceful they were, how humble they were, how they were giving him everything, how peaceful they were, how respectful they were towards each other. Now, I want you to listen to how close, how the people of Atlantis were living to what we just heard from Columbus. All right? And in Plato's account of Atlantis, we have another description of the Garden of Eden and the golden age of the world. Also, whatever fragrant things there are in the earth, whether roots or herbage or woods or distilling drops of flowers and fruits, grew and thrived in that land. And again, the cultivated fruits of the earth, both the edible fruits and other spices of food, which we call by the name of legumes, and the fruits having a hard rind, affording drinks and meats and ointments. All these, that sacred island, lying beneath the sun, brought forth in abundance. Right? We're talking about America, right? Where all these fruits and foods are coming from. He's talking about Atlantis/America, right? For many generations, as long as the divine nature lasted in them, they were obedient to the laws and well affectioned toward the gods, who were their kinsmen. For they possessed true in every way great spirits, practicing gentleness and wisdom in the various chances of life, and in their intercourse with one another. They despised everything but virtue, not caring for their present state of life and thinking lightly of the possession of gold and other property. They're talking about you, the aboriginal, which seemed only a burden to them. Neither were they intoxicated by luxury, nor did wealth deprive them of their self-control, but they were sober, and saw clearly that all these goods were increased by virtuous friendship with one another, and that by excessive zeal for them, and honor of them, the good of them is lost, and friendship perishes with them. Continuing in the book, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving, and still talking about the inhabitants of Haiti and the Aboriginals, it says, one of the most pleasing descriptions of the inhabitants of this island is given by old Peter Martyr, who gathered it, as he says, from the conversations of the admiral himself. It is certain, says he, that the land among these people is a common as the sun and water, and that mine and thine, the seeds of all mischief, have no place with them. They are content with so little, that in so large a country they have rather superfluity than scarceness, so that they seem to live in the golden world, without toil, living in open gardens. Are you hearing me, copper-colored tribes of America, Hawaii? So that they seem to live in the golden world. You lived in the golden world. Without toil, you are stressed out now, enslaved, working under the system. You used to live in open gardens, living in open gardens, not entrenched with dikes, divided with hedges, or defended with walls. They deal truly with one another. You used to deal truly with one another, without laws, without books, and without judges, according to the Spaniards, right? They take him for an evil and mischievous man, who taketh pleasure in doing hurt to another, and albeit they delight not in superfluities, yet they make provision for the increase of such roots, whereof they make their bread, contented with such simple diet, whereby health is preserved and disease avoided. Whereby health is preserved and disease is avoided. They recognized why you were so healthy, because your diet was so natural, right? So healthy, so alkaline. Much of this picture may be overcolored by the imagination, but it is generally confirmed by contemporary historians. So it's not just Columbus sayings or ideas or these two Spaniards. All right. What we just read out about how they viewed you when they got to Haiti, how you were living in Eden. I'm telling you, that's what they're saying, that you were living like you were in the Garden of Eden, in the golden world. So many fruits, abounded rivers, clean water. You had so little, but so much. You had so little, but you had so much. right? So again, it is generally confirmed by contemporary historians. They all concur in representing the life of these islanders as approaching to the golden state of poetical felicity, living under the absolute but patriarchal and easy rule of their caciques, katzing, chief, in Hebrew, katsi, Arawakan, Taino, free from pride, with few wants, an abundant country, a happily tempered climate, and a natural disposition to careless and indolent enjoyment. That was you. The History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving, and we're here reading about how Columbus' first voyage. He's still coasting along the coast of Hispaniola, or Haiti, and he's still trying to reach the so-called island of Barbecue, what the Indians keep telling him. So he reaches an island lying opposite on the harbor of Concepcion, to which, from its abounding in turtle, he gave the name of Tortugas. The natives had fled to the rocks and forests, and alarm fires blazed along the heights, from which circumstance he inferred that they were more subject to invasion than the other islands. All right, the country was so beautiful that he gave to one of the valleys the name of Valle de Paraíso, or the Valley of Paradise, or Paradise Valley, right? Valle de Paraíso, and called a fine stream the Guadalquivir, after that renowned river which flows through some of the fairest provinces of Spain. Continuing in a history of the life and voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving, who says, the country, and we're talking about Hispaniola, was finely diversified with lofty mountains and fine valleys which stretched away inland as far as the eye could reach. As the eye could reach. The mountains were of such easy ascent that the highest of them might be plowed with oxen, and the luxuriant growth of the forest manifested the fertility of the soil. Rich soil. The valleys were watered by numerous clear and beautiful streams. They appeared to be cultivated in many places, and to be fitted for grain, for orchids and pasturage. Again, they appeared to be cultivated in many, many places. So we're in this book. This is, I guess, supposed to be Saint Christopher, bearing the cross, bringing Christianity to the pagans. Right? That's what they say. So this is a book called Select Letters of Christopher Columbus, with other original documents relating to his 4 voyages to the New World. Translated and edited by R.H. Major, FSA, etc., Keeper of the Department of Maps and Charts in the British Museum, and Honorable Secretary of the Royal Geographical Society. Alright, so that's the book we're in. So again, this is a letter written by Columbus himself. We're talking about when he reached Hispaniola, Haiti, Santo Domingo. It says, these lands are high, and there are many very lofty mountains, with which the island of Setefre cannot be compared. They are all most beautiful, of 1,000 different shapes, accessible and covered with trees of 1,000 kinds of such great height that they seem to reach the skies. I am told that the trees never lose their foliage, and I can well understand it, for I observed that they were as green and luxuriant as in Spain in the month of May. Some were in bloom, others bearing fruit, and others wise according to their nature. The nightingale was singing, as well as other birds of 1,000 different kinds, and that in November, the month in which I myself was roaming amongst them. There are palm trees of 6 or 8 kinds, wonderful in their beautiful variety, but this is the case with all the other trees and fruits and grasses. So many different kinds, right? And all the other fruits. So many different kinds of one specific. So there's like different kinds of palm trees, different kinds of mango trees, different kinds of apple trees. You get it? So that's what he's saying. And grasses, meaning corns, weeds, right? Rice, whatever. Trees, plants, or fruits filled us with admiration. Again, the trees. So again, let's go back. So it says, but this is the case with all the other trees and fruits and grasses. trees, plants, or fruits filled us with admiration. So much fruits and plants, right? Naturally growing there in Eden. It filled him with admiration. It contains extraordinary pine groves and very extensive plains, pine groves, cedar trees. There is also honey, a land of milk and honey, right? There is also honey, a great variety of birds and many different kinds of fruits. In the interior, there are many mines of metals and a population innumerable. Unnumerable population. There were so many people on this island of Hispaniola when Columbus got there. We can read this in many accounts and how it was decimated, this population. We're going to get to that in the next videos. All right, and where they were taken and what happened to these people. Hispaniola is a wonder. Its mountains and plains and meadows and fields are so beautiful and rich for planting and sowing and rearing cattle of all kinds, and for building towns and villages. The harbors on the coast and the number and size and wholesome of the rivers, most of them bearing gold, surpass anything that would be believed by one who had not seen them. So Columbus, he's so in admiration, right? He's reached Eden in his eyes, the golden place, a terrestial paradise, gold in the rivers, food all over the place. There is a great difference between the trees, fruits, and plants of this island and those of Juana, and he's talking about Cuba. So we already skipped that in this book, but we've already read, right? Cuba was full of trees and fruits as well. Thousands of them, hundreds of them. And so he's saying there's so many other trees in Hispaniola, different species. In this island, there are many spices and extensive mines of gold and other metals. Many spices. Again, in the book, Select Letters of Christopher Columbus with the original documents. In his second voyage, Columbus tells us when he was near two islands when he first got there, again to America, I believe it was Dominica and Marigalante, as he calls it. Marigalante, it's a different name now, but so in regards to the island called Marigalante, he says, this island was filled with astonishingly thick growth of wood, the variety of unknown trees, some bearing fruit, and some flowers. Was surprising indeed, every spot was covered with verdure. We found there a tree whose leaf had the finest smells of cloves that I have ever met with. It was like a laurel leaf, but not so large, but I think it was a species of laurel. So again, that on his second voyage, after he went through the first couple of islands that he had actually not visited, it says all the above mentioned islands were discovered in this voyage, the admiral having seen nothing of them in his former voyage. They are all very beautiful and possess a most luxuriant soil, But this last island, they're talking about Puerto Rico, appeared to exceed all the others in beauty. Again, in the book, Select Letters of Christopher Columbus with the original documents from the Holyoke Society. Columbus, when he was in his second voyage, spending time in the settlement, I believe they called it Isabela, or Ciudad Marta, which was in Hispaniola. He says this, he says, we have met with trees bearing wool. All right, trees bearing wool of a sufficiently fine quality, according to the opinion of those who are acquainted with the art, to be woven into good cloth. There are so many of these trees that we might load the caravel with wool, although it is troublesome to collect, for the trees are very thorny. But some means may be easily found of overcoming this difficulty. There are also cotton trees, as large as peach trees, which produce cotton in the greatest abundance. All right, cotton in the greatest abundance, so clothing and all that, right? So just in case you didn't catch that, so we're talking about trees that gives out a type of wool that's separate from cotton trees, because we also got cotton trees in the greatest abundance. So these two types of trees, which maybe is two different types of cotton. All right. Again, he continues saying, we found trees producing wax, as good both in color and smell as beeswax and equally useful for burning. Indeed, there is no great difference between them. There are vast numbers of trees which yield surprisingly fine turpentine and a great abundance of tragacants, also very good. And again, in the book, select letters of Christopher Columbus with other original documents. This is a collection of the Holyoke Society in Columbus' own words here in his third voyage. He says, "The Holy Scriptures record that our Lord made the earthly paradise and planted in it the tree of life, and then springs of a fountain from which the four principal rivers in the world take their source, namely the Ganges in India, the Tigris and Euphrates in his blank there, which rivers divide a chain of mountains and form in Mesopotamia, flow thence into Persia, and the Nile, which rises in Ethiopia and falls into the Sea of Alexandria." All right, so talking about the Euphrates River, right? Shout out to Con Drop for bringing this to us, our awareness, right? This is a book called A Sailor's Sketchbook of Human and Animal Curiosities in Early Modern Amsterdam. All right, and this is I guess supposedly a Mohawk American native. It says here, Necta Mohawk Indian displayed at the Blau John Inn, 1764. All right, so we're gonna go to this part of the book, and as you can see here on the right, in animal, that's a tapir. If you don't know what it is, we'll explain soon. But the book is basically talking about an advertisement, right? So let's read about this. It says here, the poster pictures a South American tapir that was on display at an Amsterdam inn called the White Elephant or White Elephant. Like the Blau John Inn, the White Elephant also capitalized on the influx of curiosities into Amsterdam. Animals probably were purchased at the docks of the East India Company or from sailors returning from overseas, who might bring back a monkey or a tropical bird, knowing that they could be sold to the inn's proprietors. These inns were not just public curiosity cabinets. However, for the animals and objects on display also were offered for sale to those who could afford them. Thus, the inn's curious sights were not only exhibited for a fee, but were also rare and expensive commodities sold to wealthy collectors throughout Europe. The resultant mingling of social groups and practices was exceptional. The advertising poster that Belted preserved in his scrapbook probably was posted by the door of White Elephant Inn and other sites around the city, where it enticed viewers to come and see. The striking black and white woodcut of the unusual looking tapir attracts the eye so that even those who were not fluent readers might stop. All right, so they're talking about, this advertisement right here, right? All right. Look and even go in. The text follows with a broad invitation. All right, so this is what the advertisement says, okay? Listen to this. So it says, to all gentlemen, ladies, burghers, merchants, and furthermore, to all lovers of animals, to come and see this rarity, which many writers say does not exist anywhere in the world. It had been captured in great difficulty and cost in the river Euphrates in America. Again, where did it get captured? In the river Euphrates in America. You see what they're saying right here? The river Euphrates in America. This is probably an error, he says. The Euphrates River is far from America, but geographical accuracy clearly is not the issue here. So they're like, no, but they can't be talking about Euphrates River, right? Well, we'll see, right? The work of the posters is to conjure up an exotic locale for a beast that had not been seen by anyone in this country ever, attracting people to pay a small charge for a glimpse of this uncommon sight. Such a description fires the viewer's imagination. Most would never travel to America, but the poster offers an opportunity to encounter that faraway place at the local pub. Belton's sketches give rare insight into the type of response such encounters elicited, for he does not picture the animal as he saw it, surrounded by onlookers in the White Elephant Inn. Rather, he paints a colorful gouge of several tapirs grazing peacefully in the waters of what is undoubtedly meant to be the Euphrates River in America. Undoubtedly meant to be the Euphrates River in America. All right, the river and its banks are suggested with vague washes of blue and green. So I just want to show you something real quick. So in Costa Rica, we have Rio Celeste, and it's from the minerals in the water. Combination of certain minerals give it this color. And Celeste means like sky blue or baby blue in Spanish. So as you can see, this is the color of the river. So a blue river, right? A blue or green river. All right. So in Costa Rica, you would also actually will find literally a Danta or tapir in a blue river or green river, as you can see here. It says here Rio Celeste, magical waters, and there's another one right here. All right, so you can see the tapir. It's actually native here to Costa Rica and a lot of places in the Americas and the tropical rainforest. Tapir in a blue river. All right, literally, it's not a mythical place. Euphrates River. Could they have been talking about, the Amazon River, right, near the Orinoco? Again, the blue river, right, with a tapir. Columbus continues, I do not find nor have ever found any account by the Romans or Greeks which fixes in a positive manner the site of the terrestial paradise. Neither have I seen it given in any map of Mundi, any mappa mundi, laid down from authentic sources. So Columbus is saying, hey, nobody has really definitely said, hey, here is the Garden of Eden. It's right here, like for sure. He's saying no Romans, no Greeks, and it's not on any mappa mundi map. People still don't know. All right. Some placed it in Ethiopia at the sources of the Nile. So which Ethiopia are we talking about? All right. Others traversing all these countries found neither the temperature nor the altitude of the sun correspond with their ideas respecting it, nor did it appear that the overwhelming waters of the deluge had been there. All right, again, Columbus is telling you that when you go to all those places that that they just mentioned is the Garden of Eden, right? Like the Ganges, Mesopotamia, and the Nile, and all that. If you go to the places where they say they are today, like Columbus is saying, you're not gonna find it there. All right, it says, while you traverse these countries, you found neither temperature nor the altitude of the sun to correspond with their ideas respecting it, or the Garden of Eden, right? Nor did it appear that the overwhelming waters of the deluge had been there. There's no signs of the flood on that side. We got much accounts of the flood over here in America. Some pagans pretended to adduce arguments to establish that it was in the Fortunate Islands, now called the Canaries. Saint Isidore Bede Strabo and the master of scholastics history, with Saint Ambrose and Scotus, and all the learned theologians agreed that the earthly paradise is in the east, etc. Now, you've watched UB News YouTube channel. Much respect to the brother teaching us, giving us a clear perspective regarding the compass and how the east, didn't really mean east like how we think east means modern day, but we're talking about what it meant to the Hebrews was totally different, more like north or the past, right? And all this is just pointing to America. When you say the farthest east, if you keep going east, right, from Asia, where do you end up? The farthest east. That was always America, and that's the north, really. So Columbus is letting us know this, saying Isidore, Bede, Strabo, and the master of scholastic history, and with St. Ambrose and Scotus, all the learned theologians, right, agree that the earthly paradise is in the east, and that's America. I have already described my ideas concerning this hemisphere and its form. I have no doubt that it could pass below the equinoctial line after reaching the highest point of which I have spoken. I should find a much milder temperature and a variation in the stars and in the water. Not that I suppose that elevated point to be navigable, nor even that there is water there. Indeed, I believe it is impossible to ascend thither, because I am convinced that it is the spot of the earthly paradise. Again, just for your reference, this is Columbus' third voyage. He's in South America, terra firma. He had just passed Trinidad, the island of Trinidad, and he's in Orinoco. He's talking about the fresh water that comes out of the Orinoco, right? And this is where he's at, and he's letting us know that I believe it is impossible to ascend thither because I am convinced that it is the spot of the earthly paradise, whither no one can go but by God's permission. But this land which Your Highness have now sent me to explore is very extensive, and I think there are many other countries in the south of which the world has never had any knowledge. I do not suppose that the earthly paradise is in the form of a rugged mountain, as the descriptions of it have made it appear, but that it is on the summit of the spot, which I have described as being in the form of the stalk of a pear. The approach to it from a distance must be by a constant and gradual ascent. But I believe that, as I have already said, no one could ever reach the top. I think also that the water I have described may proceed from it, though it be far off, and that stopping at the place which I have just left, it forms this lake. So he's saying the water he's describing was the Orinoco River, and he's saying that the Orinoco River is coming from the earthly paradise, whatever that mountain or high place he's saying. And we know it's coming from Mount Roraima, an ancient tree stump. So in regards to the earthly paradise or the Garden of Eden, it says here in a book, Narrative and Critical History of America, edited by Justin Windsor from the Harvard University, Volume 2. It says, as he approached the coast, Columbus wrote, he heard in the dead of a night an awful roaring. So this is when he took his voyage over to the Tierra Firme, which they called South America, and when he reached the Orinoco River down in South America. And this is his description of what happened when he did. It says, he saw the sea rolling from west to east like a mountain as high as the ship, and approaching little by little. On the top of this rolling sea came a mighty wave of roaring with a frightful noise. When he entered the gulf and he saw how it was filled by the flow of the great river, he believed that he had witnessed far out at the sea the mighty struggle at the meeting of fresh with salt water. The river, he was persuaded, must be rushing down from the summit of the earth, where the Lord had planted the earthly paradise. In this midst whereof was a fountain, whence flowed the four great rivers of the world, the Ganges, the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Nile. He did not quite agree with those earlier philosophers who believed that the earth was a perfect sphere, but rather that it was like the form of a pear, which is very round except where the stalk grows, at which part it is most prominent. There are great indications of this being the terrestial paradise, continues Columbus, for its site coincides with the opinion of the holy and wise theologians whom I have mentioned. Again, so not only did he find some kind of evidence to make him link the earthly paradise there, but he's also saying that it coincides with the opinion of the holy and wise theologians. All right, so they've always known it's there, right? The mythical Hesperides, the Garden of Eden, the terrestrial paradise. We've always been talking about this side of the world over here. We're talking about American, right? And moreover, the other evidences agree with the supposition, for I have never either read or heard of fresh water coming in so large a quantity in close conjunction with the water of the sea. The idea is also corroborated by the blankness of the temperature. And if the water of which I speak does not proceed from the earthly paradise, it seems to be still greater wonder, for I do not believe that there is any river in the world so large or so deep. Again, in the book Select Letters of Christopher Columbus with the original documents saved by the Holyoke Society, Columbus continues when he's in his third voyage, and basically the dragon's mouth is called a bay in the Orinoco River, and how so much fresh water is coming out of it that it has to be coming from the terrestrial paradise, he says. And I think that if the river mentioned does not proceed from the terrestrial paradise, it comes from an immense tract of land situated in the south, of which no knowledge has been hitherto obtained. But the more I reason on the subject, the more satisfied I become that the terrestrial paradise is situated in the spot I have described, and I ground my opinion upon the arguments and authorities already quoted. May it please the Lord to grant your highness a long life and health and peace to follow out so noble an investigation. Right, so Columbus is basically letting you know this has to be, the more he thinks about it, this has to be the terrestrial paradise. I mean, remember, this is his third voyage. You've seen all the times he came and what he was seeing in all these islands in the Caribbean and everything, the amount of food and the fruits and everything, how fertile it is, and now he gets here and it's just even more, and the climate is so pleasant and so much fresh water coming out of this river that it goes into the ocean, and there's fresh water in the ocean. That's how powerful the Orinoco is, and it's coming from Mount Roraima. So, this is just one little correlation, all right? So we already read that when Columbus reached the Orinoco River, he said that this river had to be coming down from the earthly terrestrial paradise, right? The Garden of Eden, right? So now I want you to look at this next paragraph. It says, in the great ditch surrounding the whole land like a circle, and into which streams flow down from the mountains, all right? Flow down from mountains. All right, so we know that Orinoco, the source of it is Mount Roraima, right? A mountain, so-called mountain, tree stump, right? Ancient giant tree. If you go Google it, Mount Roraima, it's definitely one of those ancient trees, right? So this ancient tree now, it flows down at the source of the Orinoco and Amazon River, right? So it says here that, again, in the great ditch around the whole land like a circle, and into which streams flow down from the mountains, we probably see the original of the four rivers of paradise, and the emblem of the cross, surrounded by a circle, which, as we will show hereafter, was from the earliest pre-Christian ages accepted as the emblem of the Garden of Eden. Again, the cross, X marks the spot, right, of the Garden of Eden. So it marked where the Garden of Eden was, or the energy point, the vortexes of the earth, the natural grid it has, right? Continuing in the book, all this cannot be a mere coincidence. It points to a common tradition of a veritable land where four rivers flow down in opposite directions from a central mountain peak. And these four rivers, flowing to the north, south, east, and west, constitute the origin of that sign of the cross. All right, the sign of the cross. All right, from the Garden of Eden. It's not about Christianity, which we have seen meeting us at every point among the races who were either descended from the people of Atlantis, or who by commerce and colonization received their opinions and civilization from them. The pyramid. Not only are the cross and the Garden of Eden identified with Atlantis, but in Atlantis, the habitation of the gods, we find the original model of all those pyramids, which extend from India to Peru. And what India is he talking about? When we ask the question how it comes that the sign of the cross has thus been reverenced from the highest antiquity by the races of the Old and the New Worlds, we learn that it is the reminiscence of the Garden of Eden, in other words, of Atlantis. Professor Harvick says, All these and similar traditions are but mocking satires of the old Hebrew story. So he sees it in that perspective. I actually see it the other way around. It started with an aboriginal truth, right? And then it became religion and Hebrew words like Hebrew. One from the other side, which Hebrew means Eber, one from the other side. It's not a religion. You understand what I'm saying? Continues says jarred and broken notes of the same strain, but with all their exaggerations, they intimate how in the background of man's vision lay a paradise of holy joy, a paradise secure from every kind of profanation and made inaccessible to the guilty, a paradise full of objects that were calculated to the delight of the senses and to elevate the mind, a paradise that granted to its tenant rich and rare immunities, and that fed with its perennial streams the tree of life and immortality. Again, the tree of life, the cross, right? Mount Roraima, an ancient giant tree. Mount Roraima.
Wow!
All right, so I hope you, so far, in this hour and 20 minutes that you've been here. By the way, thank you for sticking around. I hope you've seen how fertile this land was, how it's been in the legends, as the, Garden of Eden or Hesperides. As, when Columbus got here, they said you were living in the golden world. You had so many foods and fruits and abundance and fertile soil and civilizations. All right. So that's what I wanted to kind of show you so we can go on to the next level. So if we are at the Garden of Eden, right, do we supply the world with food? I mean, is that documented? Can we find evidence of that? So let's look into this book. And just to correlate with that, I wanted to read from this book. It's called The American Past, A Survey of American History, Volume 1 to 1877. And so it says here, Feeding the World. America contributed few food animals to world larders, but American plant foods revolutionized European, African, and Asian diets, alright? Even African. Maize, Indian corn, and American native astonished Europeans by the height of its stalks and the size of its grain. Cultivation of the crop spread to every continent, increasing the food supply and contributing to the runaway increase in population that characterizes the last 500 years of human history. So you see how important corn was, just corn alone. And if you saw my corn videos, it proves this is the old world. The beginning of a civilization was through agriculture, and you just read it right here in this book. It's telling us because of the increase of food supply that it creates this plant, this miracle plant, right? The plant of the gods, the sacred tree in a lot of these places in the old world is actually a maize plant or a corn plant. All right, so let's continue. It says the sweet potato became a staple in West Africa. All right, so even the sweet potato, it became a staple in West Africa, where it was introduced by slave traders. So it happened the opposite way, he's saying. All right, the jam, superficially similar, was already established there. Okay, so they had jam. It says beans, squash, and pumpkins, peppers, strawberries. There was a European strawberry, but it was inferior to the American. And then vanilla, chocolate, wild rice, and tomatoes are American foods. All those foods you heard, right? That were unknown in Europe, Africa, and Asia before 1492, it says there, right? I highly doubt that, honestly. I know that these foods were probably there longer. Way before 1492, but they did originate from America. Now listen to this part. Of 640 food crops grown in Africa today, almost 600 of them originated in the Americas. Again, of 640 food crops grown in Africa today, almost 600 of them originated in the Americas. So you're saying only 40 of them did not? So 600 of their food crops are American of origin. So what does that tell you? Who is older? Where did it originate? Alright, so who was growing food first? These kind of plants. Who domesticated all these plants first? That means who was doing agriculture first. That means who created the first civilizations. All right, all correlated, right? It says the manioc, tapioca, also of American origin, is today a staple for 200 million people in the tropics. Again, the manioc, the tapioca, also of American origin, is today a staple for 200 million people in the tropics. The white Irish potato, a native of the Andes, provides basic subsistence for even greater numbers. Alright, so the potato, it's not Irish, it's from here. And we're back in the book Atlantis, the Antediluvian World by Ignatius Donnelly. And it says here, remember, regarding agriculture and civilization, it says the plain of Atlantis, Plato tells us, had been cultivated during many ages by many generations of kings. If, as we believe, agriculture, the domestication of the horse, ox, sheep, goat, and hog, and the discovery or development of wheat, oats, rye, and barley originated in this region, then this language of Plato in reference to the many ages and the successive generations of kings accords with the great periods of time which were necessary to bring man from a savage to a civilized condition. All right, so we're gonna now get into a little bit of the corn videos they made and how important corn was to agriculture and to civilizations arising and all over the world. All right, so what came first? You know, that was over here in America. All right, so let's get into it right now. And we're gonna see how scientists determined, right, historians, that what really determines the beginning of a civilization is actually agriculture. When they settled down after being hunters and gatherers and started, growing their own food, right? And I'm gonna show you there was people growing corn or agriculture, right? And had civilizations here in America 5,000, 7,000, up to 9,000 years ago. Oh, so you see how the scientists have been able to track the origin of corn to the Americas and how, and found its ancestor, and they determined that it was somehow genetically modified to get to the corn that we see today. And we're talking about cradle civilization. They tell us it's over there in Mesopotamia. I'm going to show you there was already whole pyramid city complexes here before Mesopotamia, right? And they started out with corn. There's fossilized corn there that they found. And this carbon dating, their own carbon dating, which is, their bullshit way of telling us history, even their own carbon dating proves it. Continuing, it says, in the absence of written documents, most aspects of the rise of early civilizations are contained in archaeological assessments that document the development of formal institutions and the material culture. A civilized, in parentheses, way of life is ultimately linked to conditions coming almost exclusively from intensive agriculture. They focused on 13 desert valley sites of Pativilca and Fortaleza, north of Lima, where they found broad botanical evidence that indicated extensive production, extensive production, processing, and consumption of maize between 3000 and 800 BC. Alright, so again, it says it is contained in archaeological assessments, right? That a civilized way of life is ultimately linked to conditions coming almost exclusively from intensive agriculture. So in reality, the rise of a civilization is based on their agriculture. And we have a lot of these civilizations saying that corn, or depicting corn as the gift of the gods, or the first grain or first plant they harvested and grew and harvested, right? For instance, in present-day Louisiana, researchers have determined that cultures that were primarily nomadic organized over generations to build earthwork mounds at seasonal settlements as early as 3400 BC. Rather than a succession of events and preconditions, the rise of civilization could equally be hypothesized as an accelerated process that started with incipient agriculture and culminated in Oriental Bronze Age. So what was first? Agriculture. Agriculture. We're going to read how important this agriculture was for the ancient Egyptians, which were the Native Americans or people that were living in America.
Several volunteers of the Time Detectives scoured the collections of museums in London, Berlin, Paris, Rome, New York, Chicago, Cairo, and San Francisco. One of the challenges confronting Time Detectives is that Egyptian artifacts have been sold, stolen, or given away to many private collections and museums. In other words, the clues to the mystery of the Egyptian maize are spread out all over the world. We found lots of evidence of corn cobs and corn plants in the Egyptian tombs and temples. This comes as quite a surprise, considering that all the authorities, all the tenure professors, and all the encyclopedias claim that there is no evidence of Egyptian maize.
All right, now think about that. So why would tenured professors and encyclopedias say there's no evidence of maize in ancient Egypt? You need to think about that. I mean, is it that they didn't really know? Or that they didn't want us to know? All right, I mean, there isn't obvious as why not, but if it's not obvious to you yet, we're going to get into all the evidence or historical, and of course we're going to relate that to the Americas, right? Because we know the ancient Egypt or ancient Egyptians were in America. You know, Atlantis, as the Greeks called it, ancient Egypt, was America. All right, so let's just start here because this is going to corroborate this article here from Peru regarding the study of maize there. And it says, over the past several decades, anthropologists active in the field of ancient Peruvian civilization have scrutinized the role played by the grain maize. This may seem like rather an odd thing to be scrutinizing, but how a civilization feeds itself has a remarkable impact on how it develops. Ancient civilizations that became dependent on farming, such as Egypt and China, established permanent settlements. So farming was very important in Egypt and China, right? The consequence of this was the development of traits that we attribute to a civilization, such as monumental architecture and organized religion. Recently, a consortium of North and South American higher education institutes, including the Field Museum, Chicago, USA, published a paper confirming that the rise of ancient Peruvian civilization was linked to the extensive farming of maize during the late Archaic period, 3000 1800 BC. Alright, so it's not just that agriculture, but maize, the main plant, maize, right? Remember that the Tibetans said that the gods provided them their first plant of agriculture was the maize, the corn, right? This, you know, we know that agriculture is the rise of civilization. And again, we saw the date of the civilization in Peru was 3000 BC. We're seeing that it says here that they generations were basically building earthwork mounds at seasonal settlements as early as 3400 BC. So there's people in Louisiana, America, in 3400 BC creating monuments, these pyramids, right? 3400 BC, they call them monuments, they're pyramids, right? In 3400 BC, again, look up the date for the rise of the ancient Egypt according to encyclopedias and Wikipedia and all that. You'll see it's basically the same date. I think they say 3500, 3400 BC. So again, in order for people to gather, say, hey, let's get together, let's start building a civilization, let's start growing, right? Because that's what it is, right? Let's get together and create agriculture, let's start farming, let's settle down, and let's build these huge pyramids, these temples, right? That takes a lot of time. So even before 3400 BC, they were already getting established even before that. So there's a process to all this, right? You can't just say, oh, let's build a mound, don't know how to build it, right? You got to learn the science behind it. That takes time.
Here's an example of an artifact that is decorated with corn plants at the Cairo Museum. It is from the Naquata I phase of archaeology. That means that the artifact dates to about 4000 BC. That's from the earliest phase of farming along the Nile River. In other words, the corn was already there when the ancient Egyptians first started farming. Here is a comparison of a Hopi Indian maize decoration with the Egyptian corn plant in the middle. The pattern of drooping leaves terminating with corn tassels at the very top are very similar to the modern corn plant. Here is a schematic drawing of a tomb mural from the Cairo Museum. The mural dates to about 2000 BC. The corn plant is with a food offering display on the right-hand side of the mural. Here we see an enlargement of the mural from Amenhotep's tomb, and the corn plant is identifiable from the yellow corn cob and the green husk leaves. Another variety of maize is shown in this example from a tomb on the Giza Plateau near Cairo. Typically the maize ears are shown on platters or on food displays along with breads, jars of beer, and butchered animals. Here is an example of a tombstone with a corn cob. There was an association of maize with the Osiris cult of resurrection. Tens of thousands of these stone monuments were made in Egypt. The British Museum has over 100 stored away in a warehouse. This is an illustration from a papyrus book called the Book of the Dead. It comes from a scroll in the British Museum dating to about 1200 BC. These examples are from the British Museum. On the left are Sumerian hieroglyphs for corn and a generic glyph for grain that is in the shape of a corn plant or a bush. On the right-hand side is a glass jug with a corn plant which served as a decoration. Here is a comparison of a Sumerian glyph for grain and a modern corn plant. The Sumerian grain symbol dates to a period between 4000 and 5000 BC, so it would appear that corn or maize was present in the Middle East right about at the time that huge city-states started forming up along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This was very near the dawn of Western civilization. A period called the New Kingdom starts in about 1500 BC in Egypt. It is at the beginning of this period that corn cobs had their greatest level of realism. This example is from the tomb of Nakhet, circa 1424 BC. There is a corn cob with very distinctive kernels. There can be no question that this plant was intended to represent Indian corn. Here's another example of corn cobs from the tomb of Seti I, dated to about 1292 BC.
And he mentioned depictions of corn in ancient Sumeria. So, I mean, when you start really looking for it, corn in these places, you start really finding it. So you start noticing that it's actually a major part of their religious symbology. And always, like in other cultures, the gods, of course, is giving it to them. Right? In this case, we see here Thoth, aka the eagle, right? Marduk, whatever he's called. It's giving them the corn from the tree of life, as they call it. Right? And they have a lot of depictions of this tree of life, as you can see. And they try to say it's acorns. Once we start really doing the research and corroborating with other evidence and other historical data, then we know it's corn. So continuing, it says here, if we look closely at the hand of the winged figure from the palace of Sargon at Akkad in Assyria, he appears to be holding something which he has just plucked from a sacred plant or tree, and has sometimes been described as fir cone, a sponge, the spathe of a male date palm, Maspero, History of Egypt, Chaldea, or a head of corn or maize. America's Ancient Civilizations, A. Hyatt, Beryl and Riff, Beryl who thought, page 118. It seems probable that maize was carried from America to Asia by the earliest Sumerian voyagers, and we already know that's very probable with all the evidence we've just read. But in its new home, where the people were unfamiliar with its proper cultivation, hybridization, it deteriorated and died out, whereas in America, where the Indians were familiar with the proper care of corn, it increased and improved. That should surprise us, because corn or maize was not said to be imported into Europe until after discovery of America by Christopher Columbus in 1492. House reports shows that rather than being a maritime-based society, Chico Norte was an agriculturally based society. This means that South America falls in line with the rest of civilizations of the world. Alright? It falls in line with the rest of civilizations of the world, not of the Americas, of Sumer, of Egypt, of Babylon, of Mesopotamia, of the world. Prior to this latest discovery about corn, it was generally accepted by historians that maize was domesticated in Tehuacan Valley of Mexico. The Olmecs and Mayans cultivated it in numerous varieties throughout Mesoamerica. Cooked, ground or processed through nixtamalization, and we're going to learn what that is. That's how you make the masa, right? To make the dough for the breads and all the other things you can do with the dough. Beginning about 2500 BC, the crop spread through much of the Americas. Okay, the region developed a trade network based on surplus and varieties of maize crops. However, as can now be seen, corn was being grown in the coastal region of Chico Norte in South America as early as 5000 BC. So it's actually rewriting history here, because there's evidence here showing that it was already being grown extensively in 5000 BC. All right, this is way before the Nakata periods. All right, way before Nakata periods, in line with Sumer, Mesopotamia, even possibly older. And you're telling me, all right, remember, agriculture starts out, civilization starts out with agriculture, right? That's how they have come down to summarize the start of civilizations. And we can see here that in the Americas, they already had mounds, they had pyramids. I'm going to show you the city, as you can see. And so for them to get to this point of being civilized, like building mounds, having the science, the knowledge, language, and agriculture, it takes time. So even before that, they were getting this started. So they're even older than that, right? All right, so let's continue now with Assyria, but we got to dodge Sahaya because we know better now. Right, so we're going to hear more about them, but we're going to see why they have so many depictions of corn in their walls. We got to understand why. It's so easy for us to see why, because it was on this side. All right, let's go. It says here, the sacred city of Karal Supe. Believe it or not, the mighty rises and stepped pyramids of the sacred city of Karal Supe were built roughly around the same time that Egypt's Old Kingdom ruled the sands of North Africa, making this awesome site some 2,600 years old or more, the oldest city in fact in the entire of the Americas. Okay, so not the Olmecs. Okay, so they always told us that the Olmecs was the oldest civilization. This is 5000 BC, as we just showed you, and you can just Google and look it up, research it yourself. You see why they're giving it that date. So let's continue. It says, visitors to the spot today can just about make out the dusty mounds of the colossal Carol temples that bubble up on the horizon. There's also a curious geoglyph cut into the desert floor, and interestingly, not a single trace of weaponry or fortifications. So yeah, it's very interesting, no trace of weapons, right? So these people not only lived here a long time ago, but they didn't have to worry about war. We would have to know who they were to understand that, why. But as you can see, this drawing right here is from the book from this author Charles Wiener, as he drew, or what he saw at Paramonga. It's a ruin in Peru in 1880, and this is how it looks now, as you can see. And this is the book, in case you guys want to see it. It's in French, but as you can see, we have a lot of pyramids over here, man. And not only pyramids, these are like castle pyramids. These are badass pyramids. You see, and they are old. These sites are old, right? What are the difference between these and the old kingdom pyramids, and that's on the other side of the world in Egypt, right? Nothing really. All right, so it's perspective. I'm not just telling you ancient Egypt was over here, Atlantis was over here. I'm showing you. All right, use your senses. What is the difference? I'm just scratching the surface once again, man. And even all my videos, it's little by little, we're gonna start seeing more and more evidence. All right, but you guys got to start using your senses and perspective. All right, so it says here from the Smithsonian.com. It says, for decades, school children have learned that civilization has 4 ancient origin places: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China's Yellow River. In the past 20 years, researchers have added a 5th member to this select list: the Central Andes, which includes southern Ecuador, northwestern Bolivia, and most of Peru. Alright, you heard that, right? Most of Peru, Jerusalem. Here we know now were pyramids and temples as old or older than those in Egypt. Again, here we go again. It says, here we now know were pyramids and temples as old as or older than those in Egypt. Older than Egypt, people. You're hearing the Smithsonian.com. Older than Egypt. All those hijacks, all those people bringing statics, talking about my theories. Smithsonian.com says there's pyramids older than Egypt here in Peru. All right, with vast irrigation networks that rival those in ancient Sumer, and artworks that would endure for centuries, even millennia. Just as in India and China, rulers built walled fortresses, religions flourished, and armies clashed. In this realm, the Inca were Johnny come late lies, flashy. So Johnny come late lies, flashy. Ruthless newcomers whose empire barely stretched across 2 centuries. It says here, left unattended, the asphalt paths of the U.S. interstate highway system would disappear in a few decades, but hundreds of miles of the Capac Nan, paved with heavy stones linked by suspension bridges that had not equal in Europe or Asia, engineered with astonishing care, remained despite centuries of neglect. Alright, so they're talking about those Inca roads, right? You can hike along them for days. People who walk through these extraordinary landscapes are not merely following in the footsteps of the Inca. The Capac Nan was built atop roadways created by the Inca's many predecessors. To journey here is to roam through almost 6,000 years of civilization. 6,000 years of civilization. That they're saying 4,000 BC, right? To one of the places where human enterprise began. Human enterprise began. All right, one of the places, the places. This is the old world. It says here, the New World's first monumental civilization from popular archaeology. It says, before the Great Pyramids arose on the ancient Giza Plateau in Egypt, thousands of miles to the west, a thriving ancient civilization began constructing monumental structures not far from the Andes Mountains in what is today Peru. Like the ancient Egyptians, they too were a deeply religious people, creating what they believed would be a lasting legacy to their gods and kings. Unlike the ancient Egyptians on the other side of the world, however, these people would eventually pass into oblivion. There were no ancient records and no pottery, other than buried structures to testify of their existence. It would be left to archaeology to raise them into modern consciousness. In 2008, a team of archaeologists hunched over an excavation in a dry clearing among cultivated fields of the Casma Valley near Peru's northern central coast. Here, led by a German archaeologist, Peter Fuchs, they uncovered a circular sunken plaza built of stones and adobe. Radiocarbon dating of the materials unearthed at the feature revealed that it had been built between 3500 and 3000 BC. Now that relates to the Nakata period too, or as much as 5,500 years ago. And it says in the Nakata period too that that's when they started extensively doing agriculture, right? So, I mean, we have to trust carbon dating, which there's other studies showing that it's not very accurate, but that's what we have to go by, and even they are dating this really old, right? Making it arguably the oldest monumental structure found in the New World. It was the latest and perhaps most sensational discovery at the Sechin Bajo archaeological complex, a site that teams of archaeologists had been investigating since 1992. It demonstrated that ancient Peruvian people were building structures typical of ancient urban settlements around the same time as the people of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and India, long considered the earliest architects of urbanized civilization. So you can see people, we need to rewrite history. Alright? This is research that's going on. Alright? This is not no myth, this is not theories I'm making up. Alright? We need to rewrite history. We need to understand that they've lied to us, alright? Because they can't play dumb like they didn't know, right? They just didn't want to tell us, alright? So, it says here, whoever built Sechimbajo had a good knowledge of architecture and construction. That takes time to develop, alright? That takes a lot of time to develop, that science, that knowledge. Said Fuchs to a Los Angeles reporter, a chief difference between the builders of Sechimbajo and the builders in Mesopotamia and Egypt, The Sechimbajo people had no pottery, right? That is the only difference according to these archaeologists.
Here's an example of a mural from Hatshepsut's temple. This reconstruction is by Howard Carter in 1909. It appeared in an exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City in 205. The museum is known simply as the Met. It was also published in a book about the exhibit by Catherine Rowery. Oddly enough, nobody at the Met seems to have noticed that the New World corn was part of the Hatshepsut special exhibit. Here's an enlargement of the maize in Hatshepsut's temple. This illustration shows the corn cobs that decorate a single room in Hatshepsut's temple. The room is called the Anubis Chapel. There are over 30 corn cobs intermingled with the fruits, breads, and jars in the offering displays. Men wearing fish costumes represent ocean travelers from beneath the seas. They were called mermen or seamen. One merchant on the left carries a corn pod and a seed bag. These symbols reveal the role of merchants in dispersing maize all across the world between 5000 and 1000 BC. The earliest destination for New World copper and corn was the Middle East. Here we see a genie holding a corn cob. This Assyrian artifact dates to about 900 BC. Most doctrinaire scholars identify the seed pod as a pine cone. However, the artistic and agricultural context of the Assyrian civilization suggests that the genie is actually holding a cob of maize. Here is another example. Here's another one. My associate, Mark McInerney, says that the Assyrians were famous for growing huge supplies of grain, not for planting pine trees. Indeed, most of the items that we see in the hands of genies look more like corn cobs than they do pine cones. Here is a sample of corn cobs from ancient India, Mexico, Peru, and modern America, and they have a similar appearance to the Assyrian corn cobs. This illustration is from a Babylonian stone tablet. It shows two riders on horseback moving alongside parallel corn rows. The height of corn is exactly the same that the Spaniards reported in Peru, and this artifact dates to about 1000 BC. Here is a comparison of the native Peruvian and Babylonian corn rows. The genie on the left is from a stone slab in the British Museum. The Birdman on the right was sold at Sotheby's auction house in London. They date to a period from about 700 to 900 BC. In the middle is an example of the corn plant from another Babylonian tablet. Notice they are all very similar. Here is an example of the Babylonian tree of life. It is a tree of corn cobs. Each branch terminates in an ear of maize. Here's another tablet from Babylon, and it shows a farm scene featuring a corn row and a litter of pigs. Here's a colored image of the Babylonian corn row. This is a cylinder seal showing a man with two corn plants. The artifact is at the Louvre Museum in Paris. It was found at the archaeological site of Uruk in Iraq. The artifact dates to about 3000 BC. This is the Warka vase from the Baghdad Museum. It dates to about 3300 BC. We see along the lower register a row of corn plants with irrigation ditches running between them. The plant can be identified as maize because of the huge size of cobs, the waffle pattern on the cobs, and the very large leaves and stalks.
Alright, so Mr. Thompson was just showing this Warka vase, as it's called. As you can see here in the bottom is where you would find the maize, or the corn, right? Depiction. And this is in the other side of the world, right? This is very old according to their chronology, right? And this is how it looks, you know, if it was painted, right, with the colors in the bottom. You can see the corn, as how Mr. Thompson was describing it in the video, and that's how they appeared in the Babylon and Syria. That's how they look in Uruk and all those places. It says here, in order to trace maize paternity, botanists led by my colleague John Dobley of the University of Wisconsin rounded up more than 60 samples of teosinte from across its entire geographic range in the Western Hemisphere and compared their DNA profile with all the varieties of maize. They discovered that all maize was genetically most similar to teosinte, type from the tropical central Balsas River Valley of southern Mexico, suggesting that this region was the cradle of maize evolution. So the cradle of maize evolution, we saw that agriculture is basically what helps create civilizations and for people to settle down. So as you can see, the cradle of maize evolution is over here. So agriculture, right? So the cradle of civilization, actually, you know. So you see how they have cradle here in parentheses, right? So they're not gonna tell us straight up the cradle of civilization. They're gonna say the cradle of maize evolution, but you know, they teach us that Sumeria, Mesopotamia is the cradle of civilization. But we are seeing that there was civilizations on this side of the world that are older than Mesopotamia, and archaeologists are confirming that in these days, right? After 2008, they started finding a lot of things in Peru, all right? So let's continue. So it says, furthermore, by calculating the genetic distance between modern maize and Balsas teosinte, they estimated that the domestication occurred about 9,000 years ago. You hear that, right? That's 7,000 BC, 9,000 years ago. It says here, for most of human history, our ancestors relied entirely on hunting animals and gathering seeds, fruits, nuts, tubers, and other plant parts from the wild for food. It was only about 10,000 years ago that humans in many parts of the world began raising livestock and growing food through deliberate planting. These advances provided more reliable sources of food and allowed for larger, more permanent settlements. Native Americans alone domesticated 9 of the most important food crops in the world. So Native Americans are responsible for domesticating 9 of the most important food crops in the world. You hear that, right? I mean, that goes to show you that's where it originates, and it's longer, it's older, right? Including corn, more properly called maize or semais, which now provides about 21% of human nutrition across the globe. So we've read in these last 2 books that, you know, we can see that America / Atlantis, right, had a colony established in the other side in Africa, in Egypt, modern day Egypt today, and that's actually was built by Atlanteans or Americans, right? Because when we're talking about prehistory, we're talking about America, right? As the Masons teach each other. So this book correlates with that. I wanted to show you this book. It's called Civilization and the Ancient Egyptians by Katanga A. Bongo, which I believe is an African, but I could be mistaken. So it says in this book, the idea that it was Europeans who introduced civilization to Africa is one of the biggest historical myths. In fact, evidence from archaeology, oral history, traditional languages, and cultural practices strongly indicate that it was the South American Indians. Again, the South American Indians who introduced civilization to Africa. Who introduced civilization to Africa? According to this researcher, South American Indians. Some 7,000 years ago. Long before the Greek and Roman civilizations emerged, the South American Indians had introduced civilization to Africa, thereby making Africa the second continent in the world to become civilized. Spurred on by their South American Indian guests, the Africans built great empires that lasted for several thousand years at a time. Contrary to popular myth, in the Western world, the advent of Europeans destroyed civilization in Africa rather than made it. Alright, so as you can see, this researcher is stating what we're correlating about the origins of civilization and where it began. Alright, so I want to finish up this part of this series, this video. I know you've been here 2 hours with me, and if you're still here, then you're one of the real ones, you're really one of the real ones. Alright, so I want to finish up with this book, Atlantis in America, by Ivor Sapp and George Erickson, and Jaguar. He's been going in deep with this in his channel. We've been smashing this book up, and a lot of different books, so check that out, check that series out, Atlantis in America. We got a lot of parts coming out. So in this book, I'm going to page 9. It says here, to many minds the stories of myth were revived by these startling discoveries. Christopher Columbus even suggested that he might have discovered the original Garden of Eden. We already got that, right? The Church of Rome recoiled at that notion. State authorities and historians of the Age of Reason, who had long dismissed myth as a conduit of knowledge, similarly dismissed the Americas as a site of significant ancient civilization. So as you see, they were dismissing it on purpose. But did not the discovery of so vast and sophisticated an empire at America's heart require the rational sciences to at least consider these civilizations as an important link in man's cultural history? The Catholic Church and conventional science both answered that essential question in the negative. So they didn't want to, right? Purposely. In the 16th century, the Church of the Inquisition decreed that the peoples of the Americas were too primitive. Their city-states were judged more recent than Jesus Christ and the civilizations of the Mediterranean that had preceded him. So you see that they just gave us a more recent time. But it's all made up. This chronology, everything is all made up. In the 20th century, American archaeology echoed that edict by declaring that the ancient Maya emerged from barbarism during the 1st or 2nd century of the Christian era. They were judged too reason and too pagan to have played a significant role in the development of worldwide civilization. So you see that? They're taking credit from people who did originate civilization. All right. In fact, the constructions of ancient American cultures not only had similar means of design in their star temples to those found in the Middle East, they had earlier devised a mathematics superior to any other in the world. However, while admitting these advanced civilizations were remarkable and surely older than some cities in Europe, historians soon pronounced that their constructions were not the equal of ancient sites in Egypt or Mesopotamia. Experts assured that a Eurocentric world that the American city-states had not been occasioned by a long period of development, but had somehow spontaneously sprung from a more primitive people dubbed inspired savages by historians. You see what they call these, right? Inspired savages. The possibility that the advanced cultures of the Old World and the New World could have been interrelated was dismissed and impossible and preposterous. All right, so they made sure they had a plan, they had an agenda when they were doing all this. All right, they weren't just doing this because they were stupid, they were doing this on purpose. Quashing all speculation that the step pyramid builders of the Americas could have been related to the ancient Middle East, archaeologists pronounced that the construction of even the crudest temples in the Americas had not begun until after the pyramid building had ceased in Egypt, Sumer, and in Sumer's recipient cultures of Babylon and Akkad. But we already know that's false. We just got it from Smithsonian.com, right? Caral Supe. These simplistic declarations have been proven false. All right, we've already seen that. These simplistic declarations, we have proven that false. All right, this is false, people. All right, you want to keep believing over there in Egypt, Kemet, and all that, it's all the Babylonian. It's false. These simplistic declarations have been proven false. Only in the last few decades of this century have we realized that the known Maya sites are much older than previously thought, reaching back over 4,000 years at Cuello in, this is the age that Scurry says here, this is the reconstruction of the Temple of Marduk in Babylon, it says, 600 BC. And this is reconstruction of the Piedras Negras site, all right, and Usumacinta River. All right, this is the Mayan temple. Look at how extensive, how massive this is. All right. All right, so this continues. Says, in beliefs or recognize that the Olmecs were building pyramids and great stone megaliths for thousands of years before the classic Maya built their cities. Discovery after discovery has revealed that the accepted dates for civilization in the Americas are very wrong. Thank you, UB2 News and Condrock for showing this, the false chronology we've been living. It says, at Chan Chan in Peru, Chavin culture, instead of sudden emergence, displays a continual line of development of a naval culture that dates back over 8,000 years. Pedra Furada in Brazil is now known to have supported a diverse culture over 12,000 years ago. Monteverde in Chile is at least that old, and many have supported a navigational culture of 32,000 years ago. Without a doubt, civilizations in the Americas go back further than established dates for Mesopotamia or Egypt. Again, without a doubt, and we already got it from Smithsonian.com, right, in popular archaeology. But Ivor Sapp, right, Atlantis in America, telling us, without a doubt, civilizations in the America go back further than established dates for Mesopotamia or Egypt. 8,000-year-old mummies in Peru predate identical embalmed Egyptian mummies by 3,000 years, and we got that, right? The Chinchorro mummies in Chile and Peru, one of them goes back almost up to I believe 9,000 years ago. We just got right here 8,000 years ago, right? Residue of Holy American tobacco and cocaine recently discovered in 5,000-year-old mummies in Egypt and in the Sudan established evidence of contact between the Old and the New World. thousands of years before Christ. Again, the appearance of a genetically American cotton in Asia 10,000 years ago, and evidence of coconut, sweet potatoes, and the American parrot in the Pacific and in Asia 12,000 years ago, all confirm a repeated worldwide contact of cultures that could only have been accomplished by navigation. The great megalithic structures of the Americas, the spears of Costa Rica, the Great Wall of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, Sacsayhuaman, the fortress. Saw my City of David video. Is this the City of David, the citadel, the fortress, Sacsayhuaman, and the observatory of Calasaya near Tijuanacu in Bolivia defy the dates assigned to the origins of civilization by our contemporary model. All right, so need I say more? Basically, we got a lot of information on this video, a lot of correlation. I know it was long, and thank you for hanging in there. I'm gonna end this right now, right here, and I hope you see where I'm going with this. So we got part one, the oldest land, right? The true old world. Now we see that we got fertile lands, rich soil, Garden of Eden, possibly, most likely, most definitely to me. And so let's see where this series is taking us. I got so much information to show you, because first I just wanted you to have a clear orientation and perspective with the information that I got coming. So now this is the true old world. All right, this is the true old world. So thank you once again for being here. All right, Hawa.